My name is Michael White, and in this video we're going to have a look inside the Waves Abbey Road Real ADT. ADT stands for Artificial Double Tracking. It is an emulation of the process used by Abbey Road engineers to create a double tracking effect for the Beatles back in the 1960s. At the time, the technological limitations of tape machines and editing capabilities rendered the process of double tracking a difficult one. To help recreate the natural variations of timing, pitch, and timbre that would occur with a natural double tracking, Abbey Road engineer Ken Townsend came up with a process called ADT. ADT involves the use of a standard tape delay but with a very creative twist. A standard tape delay or slap effect is created by applying the original signal to the record head with the reproduce head playing it back a short time later. The delay time would vary based on the tape speed. Problem is the double track was always later than the original recording. The J37 tape machine is unique in that it had a separate output for the record and the repro heads. This allowed the audio signal to be grabbed prior to its normal mixed playback position. The signal from the record head could then be sent to a second tape machine in a standard tape delay setup. Add a vari-speed control, and the engineer could, in real time, affect the timing of the delay and also, subsequently, the timbre and pitch of the performance, making it sound like a natural double track. Now, this effect is very unique and different from what you would find in a doubler or a delay effect that many engineers might use to create like a natural sounding double or even like a chorusing effect or phasing effect. You can create those types of effects here, but using tape emulation technology, we're getting something that's actually very unique and different with also some unique controls that you would not find in a plugin like a doubler or a chorusing effect. So let's take a look. This is the mono version of the ADT plugin, and what you'll have is a source section and an ADT section. So this allows you to control the original signal when applied on the insert, and this allows you to control the delay signal. What you have up here in the display up top is the SRC or source signal. So this would be your playback signal, and this would be centered. And then you have the ADT signal, which is displayed here in this record head or this audio head that you would see here. So in this case, the signal is 12.16 milliseconds prior to the source signal. From there, you can apply an LFO, either manually by turning off the LFO section and adjusting the vari-speed control. And you can do this manually either with your trackpad or with a work surface. You can also assign it to a MIDI controller so that you can adjust it that way. And you can record it in the automation so that you can punch in on it and get the effect that you want in real time. Now, there are a couple ways to work with this effect, and we'll go over those options as we go through all the different settings. If you use the LFO, then you have some additional features, including a range, which allows you to set the variation amount for how much it goes plus minus the normal position. And this goes up to 20 milliseconds plus minus all the way down to 1 millisecond. And we'll get into how you can get into finer variations of that in a minute. You also can set a variety of different shapes. By default, it comes up to a random shape, but you can also do sine wave up, sine wave down, triangle up, or triangle down. The difference being where it actually starts. So when you start up the ADT, for example, if you start with a sine wave up and you hit play, it'll start in a forward position or a positive cycle position. If you go sine wave down, it'll start in the negative position. And the only difference with triangle up and down is the shape in which it takes. So random would give you a setup that would be more natural to a live double tracking because the delay would not be consistent or smooth as you would get like in a chorusing effect, but it would be more natural and vary more randomly. You can also set the sync signal to lock to, or the VCO to lock to the clock or tempo of the session. And once you have that set up, then you can set quarter note, whole note timing, a variety of different bar lengths, and this allows you to set the variable amount or rate at which it travels. The wider you make the LFO range, the faster, of course, it will move across that spectrum, as you can see here. So by making some of these adjustments, you can get a wide variety of controls. Once you got the basic setup configured the way you want, you have the ability to offset this. signal. So for example, if I pull this all the way over here to -20, then what happens is this will actually slide over from the position of the ADT head by 20 milliseconds, and now it will vary its rate between those 2 points. So let's see if I can make this go a little bit faster, then you can see the total variation of the area that it goes. Now, when working with this control, whether you use it manually, if you turn off the LFO and you just decide to adjust it manually, there's one other very powerful control, and this is the range. So it may be that you don't want to have as wide of a variation of range. So what happens here is that if I set this, for example, to a range of 2 milliseconds, then when I move it, I can make my random variations happen over the course of 2 milliseconds instead of 20. So this gives me a way to control how wide of an area that I want to work the variation, and also allows for some unique ways to work with the plugin. If I work in touch mode, then what happens is it works like a snapback mode. So as soon as I grab and let go of the knob, it will snap back to its default normal position. This way you can always have the same starting place when you grab the knob, turn it to make whatever adjustment. As soon as you let it go, it will snap back to the normal position. Now, there are also some mix controls that are involved in the setup here. One is a mute switch and a level control for the source, including a phase inversion. And then on the ADT signal, you also have the ability to phase invert with a mute switch and a separate level control. So this allows you to mix the audio signal level in. You also have a drive control, and what this does is this is essentially overdriving the tape machine. So if you hit the tape machine harder, then you would overdriving the circuitry, more tape saturation, and this would give you a distortion effect. So this allows you to not only create a doubling effect, but to also add on to that a bit of distortion, harmonic distortion characteristic, which is very natural and very cool sounding. Now, if we go back here to the stereo version of the plugin, then this would be the mono to stereo version. You have added pan controls, allowing you to take the mono signal and pan the main signal to one side, the source signal, and the ADT to another side, or mono them up or do any kind of variation. And this also opens up the possibility for automation and working with it from that perspective. So you get this additional variation. There are two other versions of the plugin in stereo. The first version is the standard stereo version. So on a stereo track, you will get the source signal that you can apply here and the ADT signal that you can apply here. So this would be taking a stereo signal and putting it into a stereo as opposed to mono to stereo emulation. And then here we have the final version of the plugin. Hold on, let's go back to here. And that is the Real ADT 2V. And what this does is it gives you a source signal, which you see here in the middle, and then you have two ADT signals. So this would allow you to take your source signal and you could pan it center, for example, and then you could have two separate effects channels with their own level controls, drive controls, panning controls, etc., and you can work those independently of each other. So you could set up two different settings, and we'll go over some of those variations in the examples, on the audio examples below. Now, there is one other version, which I didn't put up here, which is an ADT 2V mono to stereo. So this would give you the ability to take a mono signal and split it out into stereo with two effects. So let's take a look at some audio examples and go over how this would work. Now, we can start with a simple, I guess, sort of what the plugin was designed for, which was a double tracking. So when you first call up the plugin, you will get a standard setup with some variation, so that you'll see that the ADT signal is usually somewhere in this 13-15 millisecond range or so, which seems to be good. And then you have some variation that's set up here. You can also load the factory default, and this will give you the default settings, which is what it was set up before. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to set up a bypass so we can listen to the audio signal just as it is.
The chances gotta be about 1,000,000 to 1. You pull me from the crowd on the streets of London.
Okay. And now what we can do is we can add in the natural double tracking. So in this particular case, there are no settings that I have changed, right? So everything is in the normal phase. There's a little bit of drive that gets added in by default to the ADT signal. And what we have is a random variation with just a slight LFO movement, so only varying by about 3 milliseconds plus minus, so a total variation of about 6 milliseconds on this, and it's offset, so this is all occurring prior to the second playback head. So all these delays would be coming in prior to the original signal. So let's have a listen to this.
The chances gotta be about 1,000,000 to 1. You pull me from the crowd on the streets of London.
So now we have this effect. If we want it to vary more, then what we can do is we can add in a little more LFO range. And if we wanted to make it sound, a little bit wider in terms of its effect, we can create a little bit more variation or a little bit more movement here. So let's listen to what this sounds like.
The chances gotta be about 1,000,000 to 1. You pull me from the crowd on the streets of London.
And from here, I can also kind of overdrive the audio signal. So this is what I can mute the original, and you can hear what that.
Chances gotta be about 1,000,000 to 1.
So we can add this in.
You pull me from the crowd on the streets of London.
To kind of add a little edge to the double tracking, and then we can also mix in the amount that we would want to have in here. So let's see if we can get some variation in here.
Chances gotta be about 1,000,000 to 1. You pull me from the crowd on the streets of London.
And if we want a cleaner sounding delay, then we can actually pull this back and set this up this way.
Chances gotta be about 1,000,000 to 1.
And if we wanted to have a little bit more variation or movement in here, this will also start to add a little bit more pitch movement.
The chances gotta be about 1,000,000 to 1. You pull me from the crowd on the streets of London.
So that adds in, this sort of natural movement that you would typically get. Now, you could also set this centered around here and have a wider movement. And the only issue with doing it this way, if you center it around here, I'm just going to option click here to reset it to 0, is that I can have this random variation. So I'm going to set this so that it's no longer offset and centered around, is that you're going to start to get more of a phasing effect from the movement.
The chances gotta be about 1,000,000 to 1.
As it crosses that center point. And that's the issue with working with it from this level. So by starting with it varying from here, then we have a little bit more control. The other way to do it would be to do it manually. So if I wanted to set a variation range, for example, of about 10 milliseconds or so, then I could just grab this or do it via controller and adjust it as it's playing.
The chances gotta be about 1,000,000 to 1. You pull me from the crowd on the streets of London.
And then I can write that in and naturally vary it. And what I can do is I can actually go about the process of trying out some different things, getting a feel for what works and what sounds natural, start off with the basic settings, and then I can just burn that right into automation. So if I find a pattern that I seem to like, then I can copy and paste that to other sections, and then that same doubling effect would happen. Otherwise, you may want to work with the random variation. It depends just on how much you want to control that doubling effect. If you record it in as automation, you could always record the effect output to another track by hitting the mute button and outputting the bus to another track, and then you would have that recorded onto another track, and then you could open up the processing for something else. So that's one type of effect. And then another way of working with this, if you wanted to start to play with this, and this is basically the same vocal here, what I'm going to do here on this one, this is the 2V version. So this is going to give me a couple of delays. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm taking a mono track and I'm splitting it out to stereo. And what this does is it allows me to do to have not only the original signal in there, but I can also mix in two side signals. So It's a very similar setup to what I had in the previous version, except what I have here is that it's offset to the minus side and to the plus side by slightly varied amounts. I have no drive in there at this point right now, and so I have a random shape with the LFO working, and it's just offset to one side here by about offset by about 3 milliseconds. So it's kind of shifting in this range here. So the center position is almost more right here. And I'll explain why this is actually really cool, especially when you get into like chorusing and flanging type of effects. So in this type of effect, you can hear the difference here.
The chances gotta be about 1,000,000 to 1. You pull me from the crowd on the streets of London.
And then here, let's go to another vocal part.
3 whole years since you found out the truth of my life.
So what this does is it allows you to have more of a double tripling type of effect with the plugin, and this gives you more natural variation for a particular part in the song. You can also use this, for example, to thicken background parts and things of that nature. And then by taking the mix controls right here,
3 whole years since you found out the truth of my life.
we can mix in that. If we want the variation to be wider, then I can increase the LFO range here.
3 whole years since you found out the truth of my life.
And then I would get a more natural variation. It's typical when you work with the doubling effects that you want the shape to be random as opposed to being smooth, because then that will start to have a tendency to sound a bit more chorusy, and maybe that's the type of effect that you would be looking for, in which case maybe you would want to sync that to the tempo, and I have some examples of where something like that might be a better effect. Another way to work with this is that you can do multiple effects all within the same channel. So for example here, in the second ADT, what I have is more of a chorusing effect or flanging effect. So what I have is just a very slight variation here.
3 whole years since you found out the truth of my life.
So what I've done here is I've created this, and now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to center this so the movement is kind of happening right around here. And I have the sync control. So right now, if I wanted it to happen faster, I could basically change the rate by setting that here. So this would be a quarter note.
3 whole years since you found out the truth of my life.
I can also phase invert it
You
if I want to get a different
me,
coloration from there.
but you stayed on my mind.
And then I can change the LFO range
So
to make
tell
it
me how
wider,
you been since you were mine.
which would be more of a, like a depth control, right, in terms of the total, how far it goes. And then I can slow it down here so it follows
3
more of a natural
whole
tempo.
years since you found out the truth of my life. You left me, but you stayed on my
Along with
mind.
the tempo of the session, and this would give you a more
So
consistent
tell me how
flanging
you
effect.
been since you were mine.
And I could make that shape start sign up or sign down, which would show whether it starts from this side of the head or from this side of the head.
3 whole years since you found out the truth of my life. You left me, but you stayed on my mind.
From there, if I wanted to add in a doubling effect, I can now bring in a doubling effect like I have here and set my variation accordingly to whatever way that I want, and then mix that in.
3 whole years since you found out the truth of my life. You left me, but you stayed on my mind.
So what this essentially allows you to do is it allows you to take the effect and have multiple things kind of going on all within the same plugin. So you can have a flanging or phasing effect simultaneously as you are having just a delay or slap effect. And there are many variations. You can get an idea. You could do multiple opposite phasing effects and things like that in stereo. So you get like a wider shifting of the imaging going on, right? So this is another example of how you could use the multi-delay version for this. And you could also monitor it in mono, which would basically just mono up the panning. Like right now, this is essentially mono here, but I could also split the delays off to one side if I wanted
3 whole
to.
years since you found out the truth of my life.
for that type of effect, and that just gives you the ability to pan it all out in stereo, invert the phase of anything, and all of that sort of stuff. Now, another example might be that you want to thicken background vocals. So in this case, what I've done is I have the unaffected track here and a duplicate of that track directly below it. So just to bypass this, you'll hear, right? So let's go back here to the beginning.
Something take a long time.
All right, so it's basically two voices, and so what I want to do is I want to thicken that. So what I've done on the second track is I'm going to mute out the source track in the center. So now what we only have here is 2 additional ADT tracks, again with timing plus or minus, and this would allow me to keep the originals unprocessed and then apply the double tracking from here.
Something take a long time.
All right, so in this would be without
thing. And
put it back in.
Take a long time. Loving take a long time.
So what's really neat about this is that the incoming signal in stereo gets fed to both ADTs, so I actually have more than just a doubling. It's more like a quadrupling effect since there are already 2 voices, and all of that can get added in. And then I obviously have all of the additional controls here where I can create more variation, or I can keep it really tight with the LFO range. I can do it manually if I want to by assigning the vary speed control here and operating it manually. So just to kind of reiterate there, the way that you use that is you turn off the LFO and then it becomes a manual control, and then you just decide whether you want it to latch or to touch, so that when you move, does it snap back to 0? That's primarily the whole section there, or how that works. Okay, so there's our background vocal example. Let's take a look at something a little more unique, creative, and this is actually a something on a drum loop. So what I have is a drum loop effect, and I want to show you like a really cool phasing, flanging kind of effect. Let's see, helps when I unmute it. Right, so I have this kind of spacey drum loop kind of sound, and now what I can do here is I have the ADT heads, as you can see here, set exactly to 0. And what I've done is I've set the range to plus minus 2 milliseconds. So when I pull this all the way down to here, it's basically shifting the movement of ADT1 and over here so that it moves from the perfectly lined up position out by 2 milliseconds in this direction. So when I create my variation with the LFO range of 2 milliseconds, that it's kind of shifted over by that amount, so that movement is going back and forth within that range. And I'll show you how you can play with some of those options. So I have the source signal here at 0, and I have the 2 audio signals here, and I have them, the ADT1 panned left, ADT2 planned hard right, and now what you're going to do is you're going to hear a shifting of phase as it goes back and forth, and let's check out that effect. And what you really get here is, this is where an important thing here, just to kind of stop here, is that I have the shape on one side set to sign up and the other to sign down. So what happens is they will start at opposite sides and work in opposition to each other, right? So I can also invert this. So if, let's say I make them both in the same direction, I will get a slightly varied kind of effect. Now, what I've done here is I've changed this shape here so that it cycles every 2 bars. So if I wanted to, I could make this shift over a wider area, and I could do them on different timings if I want, but let's just do it like over the course of 4 bars. And if I throw a little phase inversion in here along the way, then I can get a distinct cancellation. And if I throw a phase invert out on one side, it'll start throwing certain hits out to the sides that would normally be in the center, because they would be in phase to one side and out of phase to the other. So now if I wanted to shift the way that this sound, one quick way to do it would be to take this and shift this. And now what's really cool about this is that when I pull this, because the range here is set to millisecond values, and so I may want to shift it to something that is a little bit less than that. So I can go anywhere in between to hundreds of milliseconds, and this slight variation here in terms of the timing from this end will help to change the kind of phase relationship here. And so I still have the phase. All right, and this will allow me to kind of do a little more adjustment on the character. And I could also take these two guys here, so I can just hear, I'm gonna shift click to move them together, and I can add a little overdrive into it. And so this allows me to add even more variation. If I wanted to, I can also shift the heads slightly to the opposite side of each other, and this will also kind of make subtle variations. Or set this to a wider range, right? So just something simple as moving it up just so it sweeps by 3. And so you get the idea how you can basically swing this in and work and play with all the different effects here. One of the other things that is also unique about the stereo ADT 2V is that you can make the input source left or right only. So this gives you the ability to kind of work with the plugin and have the input source be just one side or both sides if you like, and you can monitor it in mono or stereo. So this is a way where you can kind of get more of a natural phasing or flanging effect. If you wanted to get more of a type of effect like a traditional flanging effect, where you literally put your thumb on the reel and get that flanging, then that would be most easily done by automating one of the ADT heads or both of them together so that they kind of sweep in delay time starting from 0 towards later, and then that would create the variation that would give you that sweeping effect. But the ability to sync this makes it really cool, and when you start playing with the different timings and mixing up the rates of the different sides where they're kind of following musical, you can create all different types of cycles, from 1-bar cycles, 2-bar cycles, 4-bar cycles, 16-bar cycles, and everything else, where you kind of get all these really cool variations. So that's another cool way to use it. In one more example, what I have here is yet another real ADT, and this is just a simple stereo one, or a mono to stereo one, excuse me. And what I have here is just a simple guitar track, where what I want to do is I want to create a double effect. So let's just listen to it as is. And now if I want to kind of widen this, I can put a little, again, just a little bit of modulation here, and I can do a spreading effect with it. And now if I shift or vary this over to one side, then I can start to move the second signal outward. And as I swing it outward, I can change basically the chorusing effect, or how it works. Or I can go more the opposite direction. And again, here I have it synced up here to the rate of the session, which allows me to create really, really cool effects here. And I can also overdrive those effects. So for example, in our final example here, what I have is just a simple guitar track. So let's start again. This is again a mono to stereo version of the ADT. Okay, and so what I wanted to do was just double this guitar, but also overdrive it a little bit. So it's a little bit clean. So what I've done here is I've added in a little bit of overdrive. So I'm saturating the tape, getting a bit of a distortion, harmonic distortion thing here. And then I also have like a doubling effect here. So I have this kind of moving here with the LFO randomly from side to side. And just so you can hear what that drive effect sounds like without it. So I can use that to add a little bit of an edge to the track and also create kind of a doubling effect here for the guitar part. So in this case, I'm muting out the original signal, so I'm basically feeding it off to the left and to the right with ADT1 and ADT2, and using that purely for the delay and also being able to overdrive the original effect. You can also mix in the original, like I could actually overdrive the original, have it pan center, and even split the phase. Which would help to widen out the imaging so that it actually spreads a little bit wider. So this is really truly a unique effect, a really unique offering from Abbey Road and Waves, and that you're getting more than just a simple doubling delay technology. You're actually getting something that also employs the actual use of tape machines and the way that that process worked, which was very unique. So you're also getting the timbre and tonal colorations and saturation characteristics of analog tape. And you're also getting very similar controls in that you can actually make it kind of operate very much the way that it did originally, of course, without having to deal with changing reels and going into record and all the other silliness that that had to occur to make that actually work at that time. But an amazingly interesting, unique offering that gives you something that is probably the most organic natural chorusing and phasing and flanging effects that you're going to get in addition to doing some really cool double tracking type of stuff where you may be in the mix and kind of want a part double tracked, but you don't have access to the artist to do that real quick. This is something that you can create and make it actually sound a bit more realistic and make the approach actually worthwhile. So there we go. Great offering by Waves, the Real ADT, part of the Abbey Road collection. Thanks for tuning in.